Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 107. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If he can't do it, nobody can. In fact, don't even try. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the world. Welcome to the podcast today, folks. Great to have you on board. Hope you enjoy it. This podcast is all about getting in the wooden boat game. If you're not in the game, I sense that you're getting your toes wet by listening to this podcast. And it's time you jump in head first, go buy a wooden boat or build one or borrow one or at least get a wooden boat magazine and read it. Okay, this is fun stuff, folks. It's addictive, though. I warn you ahead of time. Once you get immersed in it, you'll never get out. But it's a great way to go. Anyway, today's featured segment, excuse me, I had a bunch of beets for dinner, like as in B-E-E-T-S. In fact, I bought these raw beets at a local farm. And the one I ate part of tonight, it must have been 4 inches in diameter. I think it would have won a fair at the contest. But I ate a bunch of beets, and it feels like it's affected my voice. Anyway, enough about vegetables. Or is maybe beet is a fruit? Because like a tomato's a fruit, not a vegetable, because it has seeds. But I guess beets don't have seeds. Anyway, the featured segment today is with Sean Koomen. Sean is an instructor at the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building. He was kind enough to record an interview with me this week, and this is the 5th in my series called Interview the Expert on 6 different boat building methods. And in this interview, Sean and I discuss the cold molded method of building. Actually, he does the discussing. I ask the questions because Sean's an expert at it. Just finished a beautiful cold molded boat at the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building, a 24-foot Sentinel sailing boat. So stick around for that featured segment. I think you're going to like it. This past Saturday, I attended an event in Chelan, Washington. And Chelan is in eastern Washington. It's about a 3-hour drive from where I live. And there's a huge natural lake there. I think it's 55 miles long and it's several hundred feet deep. Beautiful lake. And they had this event called Mahogany in Merlot, which they've been having for several years. But it's actually the first one I've been to. And this year, the Antique and Classic Boat Society, ACBS, members had about 30 boats there, which were 95% wooden boats, Chris Crafts, and other brands from the 50s and 60s and so on. Really cool boats. And then they had vintage hydroplane boats there. And I'd say over half of those were made out of wood. And they had some unlimited hydroplane boats there that were world champions in the 60s and 70s. In fact, if you're from the Seattle area, you may remember names like Oh Boy, Oberto, Miss Thriftway, what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Miss Bardall. Anyway, those boats were there, and they were actually racing in their beautiful, gorgeous plywood boats that go, well over 100 miles an hour. They burn 10 gallons of aviation fuel in one lap on the course, which takes less than a minute. So my wife and I spent the day there, had a great time, and when I was down at the docks looking at the antique boats, I saw a boat there called the Greyhound. And as soon as I laid eyes on the Greyhound, I knew that this was a boat that I had seen parked under a shed near where I live at Warm Beach, Washington. And I knew the owner was Alan Tomley. I'd never met Alan, but I knew of him because he had done some work on a friend's boat, Tug Busey. So I went down to look at the Greyhound, and Alan was there. I introduced myself and said, hey, I'm a friend of Tug Busey's. This is a gorgeous boat. And he's like, well, you want to go out? I'm like, yeah, can we go now? So anyway, this boat is a 1921 gentleman's racing runabout. It's a Hacker design. It's 33 feet long and 6 feet wide. It was built in Coeur d'Alene, Washington by Robert Yant Boat Works. Absolutely gorgeous boat. It's cypress planked over oak. Alan restored this boat completely, finished it about 5 years ago. It's one of these long kind of cigarette-ish looking boats that's got a cockpit in the back, clear in the back of the boat for 4 or 5 people. And then forward, it's got hatches that you can take out of the boat and seat another 2 people. And this boat goes 40 miles an hour. It's got a 455 Chevy V8 in it. So I got to go out on this rig. There was a parade of all the wooden antique boats that were there, about 30 boats. And Alan cranked up the throttle on this boat. And interesting, it had all the controls, forward and reverse and throttle, were located on dials or little arms off the center of the steering wheel. Everything was controlled right on the steering wheel. It was really fun. We got to crank this thing up and take some really hard turns. It's a real hard chined boat. So, I mean, it really dug in when Alan cranked it. So I was having the time of my life. I took some photos and videos, and I will put some of those up on my website. So it was a great weekend. I started to do an interview with a guy there about his Chris craft, and about 2 minutes into it, the hydroplane started up racing. And even though they're racing like several hundred yards away, they're so loud that we couldn't do the interview. So didn't get to do that, but had a great time. So that is the highlight for the week. I'd like to give a shout out to our new subscribers this week, Russell O'Brien and Philip Benner. Welcome to the monthly newsletter and email list. If you haven't signed up for that list yet, shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. But you really should sign up. It's free. I send out a monthly newsletter with fun tidbits and resources and news about Hooked on Wooden Boats and the wood boat community, and then the occasional email and making other announcements throughout the year. If you'd like to be a subscriber, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Give me your first and last name, email address, and you'll be all set to go. And it's a great way for me to connect with you. Once I get your email, we can correspond, exchange pictures or whatever we want to do, and that's pretty fun too. I have for sale on my website 2 ebooks. One is called Get in the Wooden Boat Game, a guide for building your first boat. And that's a book that I wrote and published in August. It's about 38 pages. It's basically an overview of the pre-planning process before you build your first boat, helping you make some critical decisions about what type of boat you should build, what length, what style, what construction method you should use, how much time it's going to take, what it might cost, and those sort of things. So check it out. It costs $4.99. If you go to my homepage, you can see it there on the right-hand side. And then I have a book by Russell Brown called Epoxy Basics. That book is $5.99. It goes into a lot of great details about how to use marine epoxy. Russell is an expert at it. He's been doing it for years. He's built quite a few boats himself and owns the company PT Watercraft, he and his wife Ashlyn. And that book is available for sale there too. And if you buy that book, I get paid a small commission, which I appreciate that very much. Well, we're going to move on to the interview with Sean Koomen of the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building on cold molded boat building. So take it away, Sean. Well, it is October 7th, 2013. I'm on the phone with Sean Koomen. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is a two-peat for you. You've been on once before, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
And so as we've been talking here, Sean, this is part of the Interview the Expert series that I'm doing on different boat building methods. And today we're going to talk about cold molding, as you know. I'm not going to switch methods on you at the last second here.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So for those of you listening that don't know, Sean is an instructor at the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building in Port Hadlock, Washington. Married and also building a home. Just working on that now, so that's pretty cool. So anyway, let's jump right in here then, Sean. So give me a little history and description of cold molding, if you would.
Well, from what I understand, cold molding kind of evolved out of hot molding. They had a pretty slick way for forming different hull shapes, but also like parts for the not aerospace, but for the airplane industry way back when, and they were using large autoclaves or ovens to heat up the different veneers, usually solid wood veneers, and using like a formaldehyde glue. And so they were able to cut down on the cure time of the adhesives in there by heating them up and putting some high pressure on them. So that's how it kind of, from what I know, that's kind of how it got off and going, was through hot molding. And then over the years, they developed some different adhesives that would cure at your normal room temperature, and they're calling that cold molding nowadays. So there's kind of a distinction there, but also kind of form that process where you can bend these complex shapes pretty quickly comparative to shaping them or bending solid wood like in Carvel planking around molds. Can make some pretty cool shapes with it. But, yeah.
So for somebody that's not familiar with the method at all, Sean, so describe how you would build a boat that way. How would you build a mold first and do the veneers and all that?
Sure. So the basics of cold molding is there's kind of a couple paths you can go, but the main idea is you're finding some kind of mold, whether it's a full plug or a full like kind of interior shape of a boat, and then you're bending veneers around this shape, and you're either vacuum bagging or stapling these veneers into place with glue in between, and when the glue cures, the veneers harden up into that shape, and then hold that shape of whatever your mold was. More commonly, people they're setting up the entire backbone of the boat, the frames, the bulkheads, the keel, all of that, in conjunction with their setup, as opposed to just setting up molds and, kind of patterns to make your boat off of. Actually setting up finished frames and keel, and then bending strip planking on it, the most common method, where you strip plank the inner layer, and you make that layer airtight by gluing all those strips together, usually with an epoxy or some glue like that. And then you're usually vacuum bagging on veneers to the outside of that inner plank layer of the strip planking. So the outer layers of the veneers go on at 45-degree angles to the keel, and they alternate back and forth. So one layer goes at 45 degrees forward, and then the outer layer goes at 45 degrees the other way aft. So in a sense, you're making up live wood plywood, and you can actually make some pretty cool shapes boat building this way. And it's a very efficient way to use your material, too, because there's very little waste when you're cold molding.
Okay. So the boat that you guys just finished at the school, it was cold molding, the 24-foot Sentinel. That was strip planked and then veneers over it. Is that correct?
Yep, we did it the same way.
Yeah, and so how thick was the strip planked portion of that hull?
The strip plank portion was 3/8 strip planking, and then it had 2 1/8-inch veneers of sapele or African mahogany on the outside. And on this hull, because it's such a light boat, it's only 24 feet long, and the total hull thickness was only 5/8 of an inch. The fourth layer was just a simple 10-ounce layer of fiberglass. And that's usually put on there to keep you're usually using a softer wood to cold mold with because they take glue really well. So it's more of an abrasive thing to have the fiberglass on the outside of the boat.
So
that was kind of our fourth layer.
So you put fiberglass cloth on it and embed it with epoxy, marine epoxy?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Fiberglass, saturated epoxy, and then clear coated with a filler, and then that's all longboarded down, and then we build up our paint from there on top of that skin.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you were going to build a strip plank boat that was not, cold molded that was not strip planked inside, what would that look like?
One way to do that is to have almost like a male plug that's already a shape of a boat that you want. You just lay your veneers right on the outside of that plug, basically, and hold them down. Probably with vacuum pressure is the easiest way to do that. So you're, in a sense, bagging veneers to a form, and then you pop off a finished boat from there. I also know there are ways of using many, many battens on the inside of the boat. So it's still kind of running like strip planks, but they're not joined together. The battens might be like 6 inches apart or so, and then running your diagonal veneers across those battens and kind of attaching them to those battens as you go. That part can be tricky because there's a lot of hard cleanup to do inside on the interior of the boat. You have all that epoxy oozing through there, and it makes cleanup really hard. That's kind of why strip planking is a good way to go.
Okay.
Cleaner and easier setup.
If you did it just with a plug, then how many would you still use 1/8-inch veneers, but you'd use more of them then?
Yeah, then you could probably eliminate that inner veneer of strip planking and go with maybe 3 or 4 thinner layers of a thin veneer in diagonals, and it just kind of depends what hull shape you're going for and what kind of thickness you're going for when you're done. But the bottom line is you're trying to create a balanced laminate, meaning that there aren't a bunch of veneers running in one direction and not another layer on top of that to help balance it all. So you're usually going for 3 to 4, maybe 5 layers, depending. I mean, I've done 90-foot hulls that are almost 2 inches thick. That's all cold molded, but your veneers might be 3/4 of an inch, so called a veneer. But over a 90-foot boat, that bends very easily compared to a 24-foot boat. But yeah, the balancing the veneer is just kind of the bottom line of cold molding to keep it nice and stable.
And are the veneers typically single ply material?
Yeah. When I'm saying veneers, I'm meaning it's an actual just solid piece of lumber. So the veneers are resawn pieces of cedar or fir or a mahogany of some kind, sometimes teak. And they usually range from 1/8 of an inch bigger. Anything under that, you're getting kind of into a face veneer, and it takes a long time to build up veneers to get any kind of hull thickness. So they're all solid lumber. They're just very thin pieces of lumber.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how does the vacuum bagging part of it work, Sean, to get the epoxy to go into place? How do you do that? That sounds really complicated to me.
Yeah, it kind of sounds counterintuitive when you think about it, but it's actually a really cool process. And what makes cold molding really doable nowadays, you're essentially, when you're gluing anything down with a vacuum bag, your vacuum is becoming your clamp or your clamp pressure. And so depending on what day it is, if it's stormy out or if it's sunny out, you've got some kind of pressure in the air, usually between 25 and 28 pounds per square inch. So when you say you just take a small little 1 by 1 foot square veneer and want to just vacuum bag that down to a piece of plywood, you build up a bag, and it's all sealed with a mastic tape. Butyl is the kind of tape that we use on there. It's a real sticky elastic rubber that helps to seal the bag. And once that's sealed down, you pull a vacuum and evacuate all the air out of there. All of the air is pulled out of your laminate or your laminations and replaced with glue or adhesive or epoxy, whatever you're using. And so you get, your voids are filled, and you also get a lot of pressure on that veneer to help it compress to the shape that you want it. So, in a sense, it works really, really well for round shapes, especially when you're doing a boat or an airplane wing or a foil of some kind.
And what holds the veneers in place while they're being vacuum bagged?
That is another good question. Many ways to do that, but especially if you're working in a tuck of a boat or in a complex shape, the simplest part of the process is you usually dry fit all those veneers, however many you're going to do, with just regular steel staples, and they're just kind of tacked in place, and you cut them all to length and overlap the other second layer on top of that, or whatever you might be doing. And a lot of times people will then use plastic staples when they actually install the veneers, so that way you're not introducing any steel to the boat, and those plastic staples stay into the boat as the adhesive cures. So you can work those staples, you can sand over them and plane over them, and there's no wear and tear to your tools. They just become part of the boat. They're really handy.
And do you vacuum bag the entire hull at one time, Sean, or can you do it in sections?
I guess technically you could try to do it in one shot, but there's a lot of prep associated with prepping for a vacuum bagged hull, so you don't want to risk a few days labor of prepping and all that money and material and not being able to get a full, if you're doing an entire hull, not being able to get that entire bag down. So generally you do half of the hull at once, and we'll definitely do, like on that 24-footer, we would vacuum bag down both diagonal layers on, say, the port side first in one bag and let that cure and then clean it up and then, go ahead and dry fit the starboard side, both layers, and then vacuum bag those down. So usually a half of the hull at a time.
I see. Okay. And then how wide are the veneer pieces?
The veneers on the boats are usually, you're trying to stay under 6 or 7 inches. If they get too wide, they become pretty hard to bend, especially when you get back into the transom or into any tuck on the boat. They become hard to kind of bend into there. But a lot of veneers, I mean, if you're just doing a flat veneer, say you're vacuuming down a surface piece of teak to an interior bulkhead or something like that, that could be a pretty massive veneer. It could be up to a 4x8 sheet or something even bigger. So it just depends what you're bagging, but on a boat, generally around 6-7 inches is kind of tops for these smaller boats. Okay,
so you might actually be at 4 or 5 inches, kind of thing.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. The veneers usually come when you usually order them up from a mill because there's a lot of milling involved.
Yeah.
It's definitely a time saver to buy them pre-milled so you can get into actually fitting them on the boat and go from there.
Okay. And then is there any particular species of wood that's preferred?
It definitely depends on what your finished boat is. For the Sentinel 24, for example, we wanted to have a fairly lightweight boat. It's kind of a high-performance day sailor, so we went with a lot of cedar on the veneers and then the strip planking just to keep it nice and light. Sometimes people will put on the fourth layer of planking or veneer on a cold molded boat, they will put something like teak or mahogany on the outside because they want the hull to be finished bright. So you use those hardwood sometimes on the exterior. But in general, you're looking just for a really clean, tight-grained, vertical-grained veneer that's really stable and rot resistant, but it also glues really well. So the cedars are really great for that. Doug fir is really a good one too, and then a lot of the mahoganies are commonly used for veneer stock.
Okay. So what level of skill would you say is required to build a cold molded boat?
I've heard some people say that it takes less skill to do it. Especially when you get in a production shop setup or a professional shop setup. But I would have to argue that it takes just as much skill to build a cold molded hull as a Carvel planked hull. It's just a different skill set. You definitely have to have a lot of experience with the timing of everything and the fitting of all the veneers and I would say, but put it this way, you can definitely get in as much trouble if you don't know what you're doing with cold molding as you can with a Carvel plank boat or a Lapstrake plank boat. But I would say it takes a pretty high skill level to do it well. It's a hard thing to fake, for sure.
So you tell me I shouldn't try it, Sean? Is that what you're saying?
I'd say go for it, but yeah,
no, I'm kidding.
Everything. And
yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. I mean, it sounds like it's a fairly. I mean, there's several processes you have to go through, and it's kind of got to get each step correct, and there's a lot of setup and stuff required. And so yeah, it's not a beginning builder method, I guess.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. You just got to do it a couple times to get through the techniques and the motions of it.
Yeah. Okay, so how about special tools, equipment, or materials needed? Anything there worth mentioning?
Well, definitely a big one is a nice pair of rubber gloves and a squeegee for all the epoxy you're going to be using. But definitely a vacuum pump is pretty key for cold molding. The other big thing is a lot of people forget you have to be in a heated shop, especially if you're up in the Pacific Northwest or anywhere north. You got to make sure that epoxy is curing at the appropriate temperature. Otherwise, all that adhesive that's holding your planking together is not going to be at its adequate strength. So that's definitely a big one. But other than that, most everything in that method in building a boat cold molded, you're going to be using the same set of tools you have from any other boat shop. So it all kind of becomes general boat building in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is cold molded building best suited to any particular boat design, Sean?
Well, a lot of people will take, any kind of traditional boat, any traditional boat design, and a lot of those boats can be redesigned or even just left as they are and just planked with a cold molded skin on it. So you could take, for example, Buzzards Bay or some of the classics, the Dark Harbor 17 or something, and instead of using like a solid keel, you'd use a laminated keel, but you could still make the skin of that boat a cold molded hull. But generally, cold molding works really well for more extreme shapes. Not necessarily having to be used for that, but because you can make up the different layers of the hull, kind of piece by piece, you can get a real extreme bend or some pretty crazy shapes using all those veneers and cold molding, but still end up with your finished hull thickness and a very strong, stable hull. And that's the real advantage of cold molding, is you can build these sailboats, especially, or even power boats, with significantly lighter fore and aft ends of the boat. And then the other working parts of the boat are even stronger because they're that much more stable, and they're, in a sense, just a big chunk of plywood that are really strong and stiff.
Mm-hmm.
And great for sailboat hulls and things like that.
So were you saying a minute ago that you could take an existing boat that's Carvel planked and cold mold around that? Or what were you saying?
No. Not. I mean, some people will do that. Some people, I've heard many stories of people taking old cold molded hulls, old Carvel plank hulls that are really tired and then cold molding skins over it. But I'm saying more if you're starting from scratch and you're building a brand new boat, and you take a traditional designed, pretty much any boat, and you set up the backbone of the boat, and you set up the frames of the boat, and instead of putting solid Carvel planks as the skin of that boat, you can cold mold the layers of veneer on there and pretty much have the same outcome.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I just saw an article recently in Wooden Boat Magazine about putting a skin on an existing boat, but I don't know if it was cold molded or something else. But anyway,
yeah,
I was just curious about that. How about the cost of building a boat this way compared to maybe Carvel or Lapstrake building? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, the cost, if you're looking at it from kind of a custom yard or a professional yard point of view, a huge cost saving in cold molding hulls is the time. Is that those crews can pump out cold molded boats a lot faster than a Carvel plank boat, because the method of building that boat and skinning that boat with a hull is so much faster. So there's a huge time saver there. And the other thing too, as I mentioned earlier, is that you are getting some savings from the amount of waste that you create. With a Carvel plank hull, obviously you're cutting all these pretty extreme shapes of wood out of what start out as square pieces of lumber. So you end up inherently with a lot of waste from that style of building. And with cold molding, you're able to kind of maximize a lot of the veneers, because they're all being fit and kind of accommodated to the boat as you go along. So you can use up different scraps of veneer for other parts of the boat and things like that. I mean, I guess boat building in general creates a lot of waste in terms of lumber, just because you're taking square pieces of wood and making round things. But there's definitely some savings there in the amount of wastage you get.
Okay. And do you ever end up with a butt joint, basically an end-to-end piece of veneer? Or do you typically, your veneer goes from the keel to the shear line?
Yeah, usually on the one place you might end up with a butt joint is on the strip planking on the inner layer of veneer. And those usually will have to meet up over some kind of frame where they can be, they're usually at least glued together on a 45 on a miter, and then they're screwed into those frames. But the diagonal veneers definitely have to be long enough to run from shear down to the keel at that 45-degree angle. You don't want to have any butt joints there. It would make vacuum bagging and fitting of those veneers kind of crazy. It'd definitely be difficult to do that.
Yeah. But, okay. How about the amount of time required? You kind of addressed that earlier, but if you've got to strip plank the boat first and then cold mold over that, does that take a lot of time compared to other Carvel and stuff, or?
Usually not, especially if you're having, if you consider having your whatever strip planking you're using on the boat milled up offsite or at a different mill. Once you get that stock in place and you're kind of set up and ready to strip plank, you can lay on multiple dozens even planks in a day and really build up that interior skin of the hull, or the inner layer of the hull, pretty quickly. And then when you start laying the exterior veneers on, that goes pretty quick as well. I think on the Sentinel 24, for example, I think we strip planked that boat in about 3 or 4 days, and then we faired that, and then we had about 2 to 3 days per side with fitting the veneers and vacuum bagging those veneers on. So all said, maybe under 2 weeks to get all the wood onto that boat.
Wow.
On the hull. But granted, there was at least a month, maybe more. It was about a month and a half of setting up and laminating all our frames and getting all the interior components where we needed them before we did that. But it went pretty quick. It was, for example, that boat, the Sentinel 24, we started building at the school in the third week of January of this year, and it averaged about 4 students and myself, and we finished that boat in about 9 months. So, considering that was the second boat those guys built, that was really quick. So
yeah,
it's definitely a fairly efficient way to build a boat, and it comes out beautiful too.
Yeah, I didn't get to see it launch at the festival, but I saw it afterwards. And did you guys sell that boat, Sean?
Yeah, that boat is sold. It's we're looking forward to building another one at the school starting in January with this new incoming class. So yeah, it's
cool.
Really good.
Yeah, and where did that boat end up?
It's actually in Port Townsend right now. Actually moved it from it was in Hadlock right after the boat festival, Port Hadlock Marina, and just moved it to the D dock in the Port Townsend Boat Haven this past weekend. So it's good to have her in town.
Yeah,
Get to see her out a bit more and do a little racing on it.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a cold molded boat. It makes a pretty long, light and strong hull. You can have a very rounded shape or a very extreme shape if you want. And is that accurate assessment?
Yeah, I would say in general that's an accurate assessment for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So other tips or tricks or comments about the cold molded building method, Sean?
No, other than just have a lot of fun with it. I mean, it's putting your first vacuum bag onto anything is always a great experience because you never know what's really going to happen. You know in theory what's going to happen, but sometimes you just cross your fingers and hope it all works out. But no, it's a blast. It's a fun way to see boats come together, and it's very pleasing way to build boats for sure.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around exactly how the vacuum thing works and how you get the epoxy in place. But
maybe next time we'll have to talk a little bit more about vacuum bagging and do that's a whole different topic in itself for sure.
Yeah, I mean, does the bag
a little too tedious for this, but you never know.
Does the bag itself has to go on around the inside and the outside of the hull?
No, usually, I mean, in many bags that works that way. But if you're doing a boat, that inner layer of strip planking you glue together so that it's totally airtight. You actually check for any voids in that because you don't want it to leak.
Yeah.
And then all you have to do is fit your vacuum bag material on the outside of the boat, and so you're in a sense just bagging to the existing strip plank part of the hull. So that's almost your mold already, is the strip plank portion of the boat.
Okay, so then how do you get the epoxy between the veneers?
With a lot of labor. I think we had upwards of 8 or 9 people helping with all the different stages of doing the veneers on the Sentinel. We brought in students from small craft and large craft to kind of help us out. But you have different crews. You have one crew wetting out just clear epoxy on veneers and another crew spreading thickened epoxy on the boat. And so different crews are helping manage that glue, because that's the real trick to cold molding is your adhesive, almost always epoxy, and it's cure time. So you have to get that bag on from the first pot that you mix within 4.5, 5 hours is what you have. So it's all got to be planned out really well and make sure that you've got a decent timeline and enough time on the later end of it that you don't get yourself in a bind and run out of time, because then you're really in trouble. So you're always you're always racing the clock. It's definitely a high energy morning. We were starting those mornings at about 6:30 or 7, just to give ourselves plenty of daylight. In case anything did go wrong, to kind of react to it. But so far so good. That boat went really well. So
yeah, that sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's fun.
So you'll be doing another one this spring, then, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think starting hull number 2 in January. So same setup. I believe it's going to be actually in the same shop at the boat school, in the McPherson shop. And actually the original strong back and a bunch of the molds, the transom mold and different aspects of the boat are all sitting in there ready to go. So it should be a good year for building that boat for sure.
Yeah, it'll be nice. You don't have to recreate those, huh?
Yeah, that'll definitely make it even more efficient. So
yeah,
no excuses this time, I guess.
Yeah, very good. Well, you're not building any boats yourself right now because you're building a house, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm just trying to build a house right now. It's definitely a different style of building that I'm trying to get accustomed to again. But I got to say, it's nice to be driving some 16-penny nails into some fur and not having to drill and plug brown screws everywhere. So it's really nice that way.
Yeah, very cool. Well, good. Well, would you like to put a little plug in for the school here, Sean? For those listening?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The boat school is I started working there about 3 years ago. I went to the school myself in 2003, and I feel like the place is just an incredible, enriching spot to learn, pretty much any kind of boat building you want. We do it all, the contemporary wood epoxy all the way down to small skiffs, and whatever you want to do. It's just a great atmosphere to build boats. Definitely feel really lucky to work there and then be part of that school in the sense that we're just building brand new boats every year, and with a great group of students and a great campus down in Hadlock. So if you haven't been down to the boat school before, definitely come down and check it out. We're there every day, and that's a good spot.
Okay. What's a web address for the school, Sean?
I believe it is www.nwboatschool.org.
Okay, cool. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Sean, and
definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm not going to go start a cold molded project this weekend, I don't think. But I might come watch you do. I'd love to come see you guys do your vacuum bagging. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, stop down this winter, and we'll have to let you know when we get to those stages. It's a fun process to witness for sure.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks for doing this interview today, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for doing the interview, Sean. That was really fun to connect and find more about the cold molding method. Sounds like a really awesome method, a way of building a light and sleek boat, very strong boat. Also sounds a little complicated and not for the faint of heart. So I don't know if I'm ready to start one yet. Maybe one of these days I will, but I probably will start with a strip planked boat. In fact, maybe that's what I'll build next, is a strip planked boat. And I'm already thinking about my next build. If you'd like to connect with me, you can do so by email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube if you look for Wooden Boat Dan. And you can leave a voice message on my website by clicking on the Send Voicemail button to the right side of the homepage. Thanks again for tuning in today. It's been great to have you on board the Hooked on Wooden Boats ship. If you're not in the wooden boat game, I would encourage you to get in, go buy Wooden Boat Magazine, go build a boat, buy a boat, rent a boat, touch a boat, buy some lumber at your local lumber yard. Do something, folks. It's really fun to experience all that wooden boats have to offer, and especially the community of wooden boat people, which are people that are very passionate about what they do. It kind of reminds me of people that use Apple computers like myself that are usually, for the most part, really like their computers. So anyway, if you'd like to support me, go to my homepage, and there's some banners on the right there for several companies like Amazon, West Marine, Jamestown Distributors. If you click there and make a purchase, I get paid a small commission. I would appreciate that. Have a great week, folks. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. God bless. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out. We'll talk again next week.